So, what is a fishbowl? You can actually think of me as a goldfish in a fishbowl, and you're all the people sitting around me. But don't worry, I will not be the only one, because there will be more people to join me. So the fishbowl is actually, it's all about self-organization. And after we spent so much time together organizing ourselves and finding ways to communicate ourselves and structuring what it is that we want to share, I think that's a brilliant moment now for us to also make sure that the discussions we're going to have in the fishbowl will work in a way that really allows everyone to speak up and have their time to talk. And it's an exercise of listening to each other, of reacting to each other, but also making space for each other when the time has come. So I want to invite 3 people to just join me here in the fishbowl, and we can then form an initial setting. Who wants to join me? 3? Okay, very good. Please join me, have a seat. Who else wants to join? Yes, come. One brief remark, this will be recorded, so therefore I would like you to talk in the mics. One person is missing. Who wants to join in? Please, join us.
It's a piranha tank.
So, we are 4 goldfish in a fishbowl. And as you see, there is one chair missing. But that's very much intentional, because this symbolizes an invitation for everyone who feels like joining the conversation. So what are we going to do is, I'm going to ask a question, and we will talk about that question for a specific moment in time. And the person that feels like joining the conversation is invited to take this empty chair. That also means that at least one of us should make way and leave, so another person can join, right? So this is really about structuring, orchestrating, and timing conversation within a group. And the question we would like to talk about with you is, actually it's a couple of things, but I think the overriding question is, what is for you, after 2 days of communication with people, after spending time in this space, what are your open questions? What do you walk away with? And you're invited to answer. Yeah. Can I just add one thought? Yeah, please.
So I just wanted to say that what's quite interesting with fishbowls is that you sort of spiral down in conversations. And to just like let everyone, go where the group wants to go in the conversation. So don't feel like the question is the starting point, but that doesn't mean that we're constrained to it, and to just sort of see where it wants to take us. So yeah, anything is possible, and to really listen to each other and see what comes up from that.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Fran. That's exactly the way we want it to emerge, and we have an hour for that. So, Chris, I'd like to ask you, what are the open questions you take away from that session?
One of them is, what's the education path or curriculum to get to the point where we can start having these conversations on the level we need to have them on? Because I feel like I've learned some new concepts and become clearer on certain terminology here, and yeah, there's also some understanding that I brought with me and I already had, and I can see other people have maybe they knew different things, but for them other things were new, and it feels like we've been getting towards the point of having enough shared basic concepts that we could start really talking about it in a deeper way. But it feels like, how do we make that sustainable? If someone else comes and joins this group for a future meeting, how will they know what they've missed? How will they catch up? I feel like I'm lacking that structure. It feels like there ought to be a sort of education department to every attempt to talk about some complex issue, for us to know how, where we each need to improve our understanding and how others would be able to then join into that in a sustainable way.
So I think this is very symbolic. We are trying to solve on a small scale the problems we're talking about maybe on a larger scale. And what you just mentioned is a problem of specialization, right? So it doesn't make sense for us to start from zero, because there is a lot of prior work that has been done in all of the fields that we're talking about. There are no political scientists among us. There are very few academics. And sometimes if you know the prior art well enough, you said, here's a problem we're trying to solve that maybe the pirates in China solved 2,000 years ago. And you can sort of take the basic principles and reapply them, because that gives you a deep understanding from first principles. And I think we're definitely missing that at this stage. And it's going to be hard, even if we get to that point where we're all synced up, it's going to be hard to hold on to that. So how do you encourage specialization in a decentralized group? How does the group recognize who is an expert or who is a newbie? And what I feel is most risky for us is that in the absence of having solid criteria for expertise and rewards for specialization, what we're going to gravitate towards naturally is what feels good. So we're going to be pandering to the people who join this club. We're going to appeal to their sense of self-importance. We're solving world peace, like Anuj likes to say. But we are not actually solving world peace yet. There's a lot of work until we get to that stage. And I feel this is something that comes up a lot, like trying to... So solving small problems on a small scale is a lot less sexy than solving world peace, but there's no way around it. Like if you can't, like if the problem shares characteristics, it's, yeah. So I've been manipulating conversation, and Anuj probably has a lot of interesting things to say that will make us all laugh. So to you, Anuj.
Please turn it on.
Yeah, I don't know these things. Yeah, no, I don't know. No, it's just that I feel in these kinds of setting, looking at everybody looking so intense. I mean, you do know that nothing will come out of my mouth that will be consequential. So, I mean, we don't have to be that serious about this, whatever the stuff you're doing. And I think we take ourselves too seriously, and when we do that, we end up having echo chambers. And so I would like to have more like humor in this thing, more concreteness, more silliness, and just mad respect for each other, but not necessarily in a kind of a, like conceptually heavy way. So I think something that you said I liked is if we can at least have some basics cleared, nothing high-flown, and probably published in a blog or something, so we don't have to start all over again. And people from other workshops, other communities, and other kinds of spaces can read and say, you know what, we can contribute. This is BS, that is funny. And we can cross-pollinate. And like I always talk about, we have working examples that we don't need to always talk about blockchain. So, for example, the pirates, which is my obsession, or the witches, for example, or the banking in Bangladesh, or the Buddhist monasteries, how they run. So these are all non-Eurocentric perspectives where some overlap is there with decentralization. So we can learn from them, and they are not very serious. So.
Yeah, I was really thinking about, how we can facilitate cross-pollination, because I don't find that so easy. And I also realized during the sessions here that sometimes it's not possible to really cross-pollinate, because there's so much vocabulary in the way, there's so much terminology and beliefs and approaches. So I was thinking maybe it would be interesting to think of a co-sensing exercise where you have the opportunity to understand the approach of a lawyer better, where you understand the motivation of a community manager better, and where you really make yourself getting into the shoes of that person in order to get a deeper understanding that is beyond rationalizing, but that opens a path for a different discussion, because there is a limit to words, I find.
So maybe it's time we dance, you know? I mean, just, you know, exactly, you know?
That was a very dramatic mic drop.
Wow, what a nice group of men in here.
Especially after you joined, Tim.
So I find it quite interesting because like in this group there are probably the three men I feel like very intellectual sharp, very specialized, very deep thoughts. It's kind of sometimes a little bit, you know, like there's an immense respect for the accomplishments. And for somebody who dropped out of school because I thought I don't need that shit. And then hearing about all the certificates I should bring to speak with you guys, or yeah, sorry.
I'm uneducated.
You know, like what I want to say is, I think sometimes it's more important about how deep the conversations go than where we come from. And that specialization is super important for us to solve problems, but it's at the same time that we have enough sense making about the full complexity of the picture. So this means specialization and cohesion between the different specializations. And the question is, what is the base for our collaboration? And I could not go deeper in the sense making than finding emotion as a shared language. So that was what I, you know, like felt over the 2 days, that we get closer into like respecting each other and caring for each other, to allow us to have more in-depth conversation, even if we sometimes fail to fully rationalize.
So I wanted to bring in a different subject, or something that I spoke to some people about here, which is more related to all of us here as individuals, what we're here for. Because one thing that I was talking about is that we should be aware of when we come to this kind of space or this type of event. Are we looking to share knowledge and expertise and create a community of practice? Or are we looking for a community and social relationships? And maybe we're looking for both. But I'm personally really curious, like all of us, all of you. Are people interested in investing in this whole thing, DGOV, as individuals and developing that community? Or do we as experts just want to share our knowledge and then go home again and just, bring that knowledge into our projects? Because I think some awareness about that would help us figure out.
Now you can dance.
You can also both leave.
Sorry, I was doing virtue signaling. So.
That's good.
Just to close the thought. I think that's sort of a basic condition for us to collaborate and actually, figure out how we want to maybe work together more.
How do I start DGOV Seattle?
Love the question. And maybe I would like to share something with that. Starting this was not easy. And it always starts with taking responsibility and taking risks and putting up reputation for the sponsors in this case, that you're delivering on what they intend and that they feel good with what is happening, as I feel responsibility for holding, for example, this responsibility. So what we were speaking about when we were upstairs was that DGOV might not need to be institutionalized, So that it might be a good idea not to have a foundation or something similar to preserve the the ability to adapt, and also the ability to really spawn many seeds, right? So maybe the question could be also a little bit different in the sense of if you take that ownership to say, I want to do something similar in Seattle, if you ask, how could we help? Then we could respond with, like, maybe we can give you information, maybe we give you more insight about how we organize this event. Maybe we can support you. Maybe we can come over if you find people which want to support it there. And I think this would be super cool to see that. And it would be super, like, this would be one of the biggest gifts I could imagine. And while we are speaking about like continuation, I want to also put something out there. For me personally, this was not easy. And last year, we're failing to bring Athens there in December. It was a lot of pressure. But I also realized that it just needs more time. So if we continue to have support for doing more DGOV events like this, I'm personally committed to ensure that we have like 2 others of this format and have Athens in the end of 2020. If the support is there, and but in addition to that, I think we should spread out, because after Athens, I feel like it is time to end the experiment for me personally, and say, I'm willing to hold that and take the responsibility for many things there on the way, but then I would like to step down and let's see, if the experiment was successful or not. Yeah. Because if we have a continuation without, the core team being involved, I believe this is what really would say this is success of DGOV.
Absolutely, yeah. Being able to know that you are not required, especially in something like DGOV, where it's got to be decentralized to work.
The word of the day for me is duocracy. I never heard about this. Now I love this concept. So I think, the way we started this, there was a moment after we understood that conference is not happening and we were kind of in the limbo. But I kind of felt that we need to do something. So we started this wiki report, and this Telegram group that we have now, it has at time 4 people. And during the Web3 conference or at Berlin, I just message, hey guys, let's do a lunch together. And there was 4 people on the first meetup, and it went so well. We organized the second meetup, it got at 20 people. The next one got 30 or 40 people and so on. So overall, I think every movement, every thing like this starts with some kind of gathering. So you're free to we have I kind of touched this this thought touched me before, and I created a small page where I described how we do the meetups, the steps, take the logo here, put this there, don't forget to request the feedback after the event and so on. So it's easily accessible information, and we are not holding nor brand, nor ideology, nothing, no resources. We're eager to support if you want to do anything.
Awesome.
Yeah, I would like to continue what you just said. I like duocracy a lot as well, and I do think that this is exactly how it started. So we had a couple of people that invested their energy, and it comes naturally. As soon as you invest your energy, you start speaking about it with a lot of people. And the more people you talk about it, the more fuss you actually make. So it takes a lot of events, it takes a lot of contribution and a lot of talks. And when people become aware of this really becoming a thing, then a lot of different people just join the debates and start contributing their own time. And it's not only about the fuss that you make, it's also about the, when you invested your time, it was we had 3 people working on it because you are so productive. So it always felt like we were having a lot of help, and the fact that we failed when it happened because of a lot of elements, but one of them was that we simply weren't ready, because the duocracy, how it works is that when somebody contributes, he or she takes the responsibility. And at that moment, we weren't really aware of who were the stakeholders that were investing their time and energy. So when there was the debate about the money and the responsibility, there was no clarity on who are the stakeholders. And all of a sudden it was like, yeah, but then we're not doing it. So I think that was like the important step forward, and it made us realize that there are certain things that we still have to work on if we really want this to happen. And it's still under the question. I mean, if there's not going to be any follow-up on it, if there's not going to be more time invested in it, then it's pretty much going to, go with the flow, but maybe in a different direction.
So I'm going to add one thought before exiting that just reminded me. I had a quite strong déjà vu as Tim was just sort of realizing in the moment that he should just say, hey, go for it, start your own DGOV community in your city. It was a déjà vu from WeShare, the community that I've been part of for quite some years. And one of the key aspects of that from the beginning was that anyone who wanted to just start an event and a community could just do it. And I think what's so interesting about that and what's so challenging is actually that as a leader, it's really quite hard to detach and to let go and be like, yeah, anyone, you can just run with this and make out of it what you want. And I just think that that's one of the most interesting challenges when we talk about distributed governance, is actually as leaders, what is the role that we need to have and how can we detach ourselves or let go to enable whatever wants to emerge can happen.
And I do think it starts or ends, I don't know, with being honest to yourself, because like when you facilitators came into DGOV, for me it was pretty simple just to like let go. Like I had too much work honestly, and when the facilitators came it was just so relaxing for me, and I appreciate the help a lot. But I mean, if you're honest with yourself, how much you can contribute to the table, then it's much easier to let go of the function that leadership presents.
I love that you brought that up. I have a feeling that facilitation is a bit like the mortar that keeps bricks together, and on a very different way than what was done on hierarchical organizations. So if we think of any kind of governance as a way to deliver goals and avoid risks, when we remove hierarchy, we don't have an immediate way of taking decisions and being accountable to one another. And facilitation helps this come true. And facilitation, like leadership, has to have a deadline. You have to make yourself obsolete. So the idea is to share the facilitation capacity so that this role can rotate and we can become truly decentralized. Just a second, Peter. I just want to share an experience and I'll leave and you guys continue. I came to Berlin to attend the Potsdam Institute for the Climate gathering around the Global Commons. And this gathering exists because of a facilitation group. It's a facilitation group called the Value Web, that is a sister organization to Inspiral, to WeShare. They operate with the World Economic Forum and the Global Commons Alliance. And they realized that they had to self-fund to deliver the work they wanted because there wasn't clear funding on it. So they got memorandums of understandings from the organizations they were facilitating, and they self-funded. So it's this kind of drive that is necessary to get the work done. So I think that something we could think is how the organizations that are present here can offer memorandums of understandings to DGOV so that we can self-fund. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's really important to not only facilitate, but to facilitate the creation of other facilitators. And I think as leading a group or a community, right, a big part of it is initially, I guess, early stage of a community, it's all about, I guess, fostering and facilitating the culture and growing that. and growing a culture of other enablers so that it can really scale and flourish by itself. And in contrast to one of the comments made earlier, that how like leaders may find it hard to let go, I actually think it's one of the most fascinating aspects of leading community, to actually see it grow beyond your means and what you've ever really imagined.
So back to what Fran was saying about the social aspect and the community of practice, and yeah, I think I came here primarily to get inspired and exchange ideas, and I kind of ignored the social aspect and social connection. And what I'm taking out is actually much more this aspect. Actually, I'd like to start a DGOV in Paris as well. At least I could speak French instead of English. That would be much easier for me. That's the main reason, I have to admit. Yeah, but another thing that I keep is actually on the other side, the side of exchanging knowledge and point of view, and trying to, yeah, clarify what it is that we're talking about, decentralized governance, kind of thing. I'm kind of amazed of the lack of clarity. So I think that there is something that attracted us all together, and there is something definitely that is being built from a social standpoint, but it's like a black hole in the middle. So I'd love to see if, you know, we can continue on this path. Some sort of clarity emerging. It's not there. There are too many concepts, too many ideas. I don't see it necessarily as negative. It's super diverse, and it calls for some creation, but it's definitely not there yet. Yeah, that's my feeling.
I felt called to jump in when we were talking about like bringing in the facilitators, and I've heard this phrase like a couple times, and I think the thing that really triggers in me is like, I don't think of myself as a facilitator. I think everyone needs to learn the skills of facilitation. I don't think we should have separate facilitators and then everyone else like sits and is facilitated. Actually, I think distributed governance is about facilitating and about like making space for each other to make decisions together, and actually learning about human dynamics and like what it feels like to actually make space for each other. So I wanted to kind of throw that in the center, and like I liked what you said. I think about, maybe it wasn't you, about enabling other people to facilitate, or encouraging people to get those skills and learn about these like ancient practices. Well, not ancient, but like sociocracy is like a distributed governance tool that's been around for over a century. And like, you know, I've talked to 3 people about sociocracy here, and people don't know about it. It's like, yeah, how can we all tool up to kind of, yeah, facilitate DGOV? I would love to talk about that. Everyone's leaving. This is awkward.
I actually talked about that similar thing with Chris and Marina. We were actually talking about how the educational system works and how everybody should be taught how to be a mentor. So not only are they getting the mentorship, but they might, at the end of it, become a mentor themselves. So maybe it's the same with facilitating. So you are facilitating, but we are at the same time observing the patterns and learning how to facilitate ourselves. So perfect, good talk.
I just wanted to add in the thing that Chris said about education. Like, I'd love to see us co-curate like resources and tools and, you know, practices that can actually help grow the mindset. Like when you meditate, you grow different ways of thinking. How can we grow that for DGOV, like for facilitation, for distributing power?
Well, 1:00 p.m. everybody meditates every day. No? Okay.
I jumped in because I kind of got excited by the idea of the freedom to set up, like someone saying they want to set up DGOV Seattle. And I'm kind of a doer, so I think by doing with other people. And so I have this idea that I want to set up DGOV nested within a decentralized arts lab. Because artists have like a long tradition of strange play with governance structures. And strange play with governance structures and technologies as communication structures, and understanding how when these things get mixed up and mashed together, people understand things differently. And so that thought is connected to another thought. So the problem with this is if we have DGOV Seattle, and I guess the WeShare model, I didn't know that everyone was free to take WeShare and do what they like with it. But does DGOV have one logo and anyone who does it uses that one logo? Or do we have, do a million DGOV logos bloom? I don't know. And then what isn't DGOV? I mean, can we see can we imagine the fascist overtaking of DGOV for their own, so these are my questions.
I think these are very interesting questions. Regarding the logo, we need clarification for that. I could imagine that because with open source communities, if you read the literature, that the logo is very strong part of disputes. And the question is, how do you protect the logo so that it stays in the commons? I think that we need to get clarification on that from a legal side, looking in the direction there. And to ensure that it's open source and can be used under a commons license to also, start to use in different ways, maybe. But we need to get clarity on that. The other thing is, can you repeat the second question? Because that was the first one.
I think it was, can 1,000 DGOV logos bloom, one, and two, what isn't DGOV? So who isn't allowed to use it? And
what is it? Yeah. What is it? What isn't it?
I guess the point is more about how do you prevent appropriation by evil forces? I know, I'm being a child, but you know what I mean. So it's use with the values that we are sharing.
It's interesting. This is the question also, how do you hold space when you plant a tree or a plant so that nobody stumbles over it in the beginning and it's dead already? And how do you grow it to the part that it has seeds and that the seeds can really bloom? And I think this is something where, everybody could step up and say, I'm DGOV, but in the heart of DGOV, there is a social fabric, and you probably spoken too close to everybody here. And this social fabric is a protection for that as well, because people know the root of, how this started, and this was kind of a ritual for that as well. To develop a shared understanding. When you hear about DGOV, there might be some people you trust in this group, you will ask if this is correct or not correct. And based on that, this is a protection mechanism which allows to, protect something like the seed in the early stage. But in the end, there will be always conflict, and I think it's also important to acknowledge that. And that's a requirement also to grow and to get stronger. But in the end, the question will be the seed which is planted here, which was, brought forward from the organizing facilitation team, can only really grow if it's getting that protection and the fertile ground from that, enlarged social structure which is around it. And then we bring it hopefully to the point that it becomes more resilient, or resilient enough to also, be resilient enough to be not sabotaged. Because this is the unfortunate truth of this world we live in, that organizations which challenge the status quo are undermined and corrupted on purpose, and that there are resources spent to do that. So, how do we make it resilient is a question to go with.
It's interesting that when you talk about, I stepped in because there's really interesting ontology in this group, because you're talking about co-opted and forces, and I noticed that we almost never use the word leadership here, and it's about facilitation, and it's about decision making, and it's about inclusion, and it's quite clear that even the ontology of what we're talking about is very different. So we wrote about how everyone's a leader, but it's really interesting to look at that more about how everyone's a facilitator or a doer rather than talking about leadership. I think we've had some healthy conversations about power, because power does come from doing and from facilitating, and I think those of us who are traditionally or easily in leadership roles, which is probably everybody in this room, the mindset shift is really challenging kind of on a minute-by-minute basis, right? We're sort of with, I'm with 50 smartest people in the room, like every single person is the smartest person in the room, and every single person is a leader probably in some significant area in this facilitation, right? And there is sort of a minute-by-minute watching of our language and of our taking turns and facilitating one another's strengths. It's really a learning process for me personally, and it's very rewarding.
Nice. It's loud. I had something come to mind, Tim, while you were speaking. Over the last weeks, Tim's leaving, but over the last weeks, we've had some great discussions from the point of view of what does it mean to be a leader in a distributed network? Or I know that you've sat with that tension, and I've been, it's been really fun and interesting to help hold space for that, and talk about in Spiral and other networks and how to hold that tension. Since we're using biological metaphors, two different metaphors came to mind, which just opened the space of how we could think about what DGOV is, which I think Ruth was kind of hinting at. So the first metaphor, which I think I offered to you a month ago, was the flock of birds. So within a flock of birds, it usually starts with one bird that is looking at a point on the horizon, and that bird's joined by another bird. And for a while, the flock grows, or it grows into a swarm. But for a while, that lead bird is setting the destination, and the other birds are kind of synchronizing and looking to the same place as that first bird. And then eventually, that flock starts to take on that swarm behavior where it's no longer one bird that's leading. So that's an interesting way of thinking of trying to build a momentum or a community that starts to self-govern. But then another way of thinking about it is DGOV a piece of DNA? And if you think about how bacteria swap DNA and horizontal gene transfer, that you get a strand of DNA and then it gets transferred to another bacteria, that bacteria will take it up, it'll mutate, and it'll be expressed in a very different form. So I think it's an interesting way to, those are two very different metaphors with very different patterns, with very different implications as well. Cool, that's it.
In Alcoholic Anonymous, you have a support system where you would have a sponsor who would keep you in check, because you're a raving alcoholic, let's face it. I'm being serious for a change. For God's sake, people, take me seriously, no laughter. So I should not laugh. And you have to keep doing that. And the interesting metaphor, or the kind of semiotic trick that these people play is, even after, say, 18 years of not touching alcohol, they would say, I am Anuj and I am an alcoholic. They would not say, I'm over it, because the potentiality is always there. And those kinds of alcoholic, and it will make sense, why am I talking about alcohol, I hope so. And every week or month when you go to these kind of support groups, you can revitalize and recharge, and you realize it's so deep in me, this alcohol thing, that it's just not. And I think something that you mentioned, that it's truly this room is 1% of 1% of 1% of 1%. And it's mostly leaders or people leading in some field. And we have such a cultural heritage or baggage throughout the world of leading and controlling and centralizing our ego. These were egomaniacs. So as almost like a ego anonymous group is what I look at. That's what I'm, And it's like, this is like a, it's like, oh, so you too have ego?
Hi, I'm Raphael. I'm an ego anonymous.
Exactly.
Or I'm an egonomist, egoist, egomaniac.
Exactly. So, hi, I'm Anuj. I'm an egomaniac. And I would like to recruit all of you 49 others as my sponsors, And this is how I look at every week or month, if you have Zoom call, meet in person, and just check each other up, look into your eyes and just say, you're full of shit.
So, to rebound on that, I think on a less self-congratulatory note, rebounding on what you're saying, I mean, this has been a fascinating experience for me to learn about how to self-organize a bunch of people. But we do run the risk of, it still hasn't convinced me that this is the way that I want to run my company, for example. Because fundamentally, we've talked a lot, we've self-organized to talk about self-organization, but I'm not sure that many operational things have come out of what we're doing. And if I'm pretty certain, I'm prepared to bet actually, that the leaders / facilitators, whatever you want to call them, are the ones who are going to carry this mainly for the time being and keep DGOV alive. And that if the organization or DGOV itself doesn't provide something of use to all of its members, eventually it'll go the way of every other self-organized thing that's ever happened before, and it won't really change the world. So I don't know where I'm going with this. I'm just saying I am an egomaniac, and I want to do something operational about all of this.
Yeah, so I'm Grace, and I'm an egomaniac. And it's... Hi, everybody.
You won the game of it, less ego.
But, so I actually started the pub talking about death, but I want to talk about death and metamorphosis, because we talked about that a little bit in our group, and he was saying it'll go the way of all organizations, and I think that that's one of the things that we want to build for, is death and metamorphosis. And there's some metamorphosis that we kind of know about, and we know where we are now, and when we talked about that, like there's a stage where the leaders are going to carry it forward, and then there's a stage where it becomes, it could be some form of collaborative decision-making or collaborative democracy, or, there's a point at which more of the people want to say, hey, I want to be an actual member, not just come once in a while. What does membership look like, right? Or belonging look like? So I think that that's a metamorphosis that we know that organizations go through, and almost all of our organizations go through, when it becomes not the founder's thing, and that might be a certain amount of money that you raise or a certain number of people that are involved, and that's a natural metamorphosis that we know is going to happen because that's how organizations work. And then there's a natural cycle, and planning for those, knowing those are going to come, I think that's going to be part of what we're discovering together and part of what we're going to document together, and then even planning for transition to going the way of all things is something that we'll be able to talk about in these groups.
So one thing I'd like to make explicit is it seems that there is this idea that there is something inherently bad about hierarchy. There is something inherently bad about leadership, and it's not explicitly stated. And I would like to challenge that assumption. And hierarchy is not necessarily evil. Bad hierarchy, giving power to the people who haven't earned it and who would abuse the power, that's what we're trying to avoid. Good leadership is amazing. Good leadership inspires. Good leaders serve. good leaders specialize in the things that they actually know something about. And we want to encourage good leadership. And if we create a culture where we're saying, oh, there's something wrong about leadership, everything has to be entirely flat. Well, very few societies, even really small ones, have ever gotten anything of substance done without good leadership. So when we see how leadership fails, usually we're not talking about leadership itself as a problem, but we're talking about the abuse of power. We're talking about systems that don't have feedback loops. So if you want more of something, you should reward that. Some systems, they get to a point where they're so ossified that doing bad things doesn't weaken you. And if you can structure a system where doing the right thing makes you more powerful, and at some point you become really powerful, but you got there by serving others in a way that's transparent and anyone can vet, that's a great outcome, even if it's a hierarchical outcome. So the ideal, in my view, would be some sort of meritocracy. People have spoken about duocracy here, and duocracy works where there's no resource contention. So if you want to do something with your own resources, your time, your attention, your money, you don't need to ask for permission, and that's great. But if we have a shared budget for DGOV, then that can't be permissionless, right? Like, we can't let anybody just take funds out of the shared budget. So we would need some mechanism to arrive at a shared understanding of what our priorities are. And I think we have a great opportunity to test these ideas on a small scale with DGOV itself. If we make as much possible transparent from the earliest possible stage, it doesn't have to be on the blockchain necessarily. We can embody these principles before we have like a super sophisticated platform for doing it. We could just say, well, we'll publish all of the accounting, everybody that contributes, whether they're buying a ticket or they're sponsoring the event, they can see where the money went. And then we're making power, because we do have leaders, we're giving them power that's proportional to the risk, because the leaders of DGOV, people who have set this up, like Tim, they know all of us, and they have a strong incentive to maintain their reputation. So I think we just have to be very mindful of balancing power with risks, applying the principles of making things explicit, making them transparent, allowing people to vet, maybe deciding that some of our budget goes towards vetting so there isn't a problem of who does it. And if we can get this to work on a small scale, we have a vested interest in seeing this work. So it could be a melting pot for ideas, and a place where we can be very early adopters of various systems and approaches. I really like the hand signals, for example. I saw that as a very nice form of social proof. People are raising their hands. Some point I have to raise my hand too, right? And that's nice. Like, the same principles could work in our other areas as well.
Okay, my name is Martin, and I'm a failed egomaniac, maybe. So that's why I'm here. So I just, because we were in painting different pictures of how this could evolve and which direction it's going, just want to add my perspective. The first thing is I want to say is I think it is crucial that this DGOV will continue. Definitely, it's really important that we have this on a regular base. But giving the picture I'm going to paint, I want to suggest that ideally it shouldn't be operated necessarily like a company or any type of massive legal entity, because what I've seen here, and it's from what I've been studying and getting very interested in recently, is in the history of science. Basically, I could see that this meeting and this event here was not a black hole, but it's rather it was like a nebula or a soup. And this is emerging here because we have been left with a technology 2 years ago, or 4, 5, 10, whatever, whenever you want to count, and it had started to attract a number of people from different levels of society, and right now we don't know really where this is going, and clearly we can't, and we are worried about this, but we should not, because I would assume that this is growing, and in the beginning of every big, according to Thomas Kuhn, every big scientific field or change we could, there was a book, or there's a story, there's something that then everyone feels attracted to and reads, and then will take off in its own directions. And I could imagine that if that would be like an emerging movement, in a few years we would meet and would be so busy in all these specialized fields that have been emerging, like governance and DAOs and finance, whatever. And that will be just basically when I'm going to leave again, because it will be awfully boring, actually. You know. But so I just want to give you this idea of that's super boring. If you go to scientific conferences, they are terrible. You fall asleep. The people are just reading newspaper, and because you already know what they're talking about. So we are here because we don't know what we are talking about, and that's where it starts, right? Okay.
On that note, I think it's really important that we work towards knowing what we're talking about, and so I think you make a really good point that a lot of those sorts of movements started with a book or an event. And something we like to do is use, as you're saying, our own language, our own ontology, to express what we're working on, what we're hoping for. But that is a very unscalable way to build culture, I think, because it creates a barrier, right? There's jargon, and if you don't understand, you can't really participate. So what these books do is they create a common language that a community and a culture and a movement can coalesce around. So I don't know what the action steps out of that are, but I think we all need to think about getting serious about sitting down in a dark room and doing the work, whether it's like creating a book or whether it's, and I don't know, I'm kind of conflicted here because we do have a proliferation of like blogging kind of things, right? Where we're all talking about our own ideas and they're kind of going past one another because we all share principles, but we don't have a shared language. So it's hard to build operational steps off of that. Yeah.
Can I just quickly jump in between? Just wanted to announce that we have 15 minutes left, and this is just a brief reminder to also give some space for those people that might want to contribute but haven't spoken yet. Okay? Please continue. Sorry.
So I found what you said to be very, very relevant to the problem of coordination. So one way to coordinate is you have some sort of leader. You don't really understand how they're making decisions, but you trust them. So that's competence without comprehension. Maybe even they don't understand how they're making decisions. And that doesn't scale. And also you have the risk of the leader becoming corrupt at some point, and you're not really understanding how this process works. So if you want to get beyond that, we as a community can work to arrive at a shared understanding of the problem that we're solving. And then instead of having someone make the decisions, we have a shared decision criteria. So we're basically taking all of these raw ideas and our sense of purpose, and we're compressing it into a crystal. And competent, and we're getting to the point where instead of having competence without comprehension, we have competence with comprehension, which is transferable and can be distributed. And that's my definition of understanding. If you understand something, you can explain it to someone. So if we ever get to the point where we like compressed all this raw soot into a crystal, and the crystal can be copied, then we can coordinate with less centralization. Then you don't need somebody in the middle telling everybody what the time is, because like well, we've distributed the mechanism for building a watch, and everybody can look at their own wrist and say, oh, this is the time. And that's more scalable, it's more resistant to corruption. And if we could do that on a small scale for DGOV, then that's the principle that we could use maybe in other larger settings. We could say, oh, this is how you do it. So I found that very interesting because every great movement seems to start with this crystal of compressed understanding. And then the efforts of many are coordinated through this mechanism.
Yeah, also I think we talked about a lot of what they're doing and like I think the purpose is still something I think we implicitly we think about, we know all what we share, what the values are, what the purpose is, why we're here. But I think we might need to do this more explicit. If we want this to be a really decentralized organization, if we're not explicitly calling out the values we all think we share, how do we know that we actually share them? Because if we want to have happening in Seattle and in Paris, and what is the thing which makes this organization somehow connected? Like, what's the constitution? What are the values? And I'm just raising this as a question because otherwise, why do we exist? And like, what is it? What we are doing? And like, I don't know. It's a constant question I had for the last 45 minutes of following the discussion.
I would like to add something on the notion of sense making and knowing. So I understand the drive that a lot of people here have to try to understand or try to make sense or try to get some sort of concrete takeaway of like, okay, how am I going to go and implement this now? But there's actually something happening on a meta level right now that us as individuals might not understand, but it is happening. The collective intelligence that is emerging is just very young, and we haven't figured out how to tap into it in a coherent kind of stream way, but it is happening. I mean, it's something that always happens in groups. So I think to try to kind of in a very cerebral way, try to immediately think of like, these are my takeaways and this is what I'm gonna do and like, this is how we're gonna structure it. It is something that emerges with time, and as you think about it over the next few days, something will emerge. So I would encourage everybody to leave space for that emergence rather than just trying to make everything concrete right away and you know, where the cerebral part of your thinking takes over, and allow for the other parts of sense making to take place.
Yeah, and just, I don't know, one specific idea of, I don't know, a possible emergence is I feel like a lot of people here met at DevCon or at ETH Berlin, and so it's kind of, I don't know, ETH Denver is like legendary in America for when people had an incredible experience there, so it's like a lot of us coalesce at these like, you know, okay. So, yeah, sorry, I am extremely nervous talking into a microphone, so yeah, now I just feel really awkward. So, yeah, basically a lot of us coalesce at these different events and, you know, that kind of recur anyways, so it could be really cool to think of there being like a channel of, like, you know how there's like a conference track at conferences, so it's like we kind of have created our own unconference emergence structure that's like recurring and systematized, so it doesn't have to be completely creative from scratch, but if it's kind of like there's always a DGOV core in some way, that could be really cool. Like I'm pretty involved in organizing ETH San Francisco. I know that probably people here are ETH Berlin, so that could be a cool thing to consider.
Yeah, I think conferences are a really interesting social protocol that we've developed for pushing forward these ideas, but we need to get more creative with other protocols at the social layer that can help us push things forward. We have a lot of engineers working on technical protocols, but we need to be equally focused on the technologies we use to build our knowledge and share it and propagate it. So yeah, conferences are one thing, right? Like we all have also meetup groups in areas that we live in, but I think there's a lot more that we could do there. And a lot of times we leave the protocol design to the engineers, but we can all build those versions, right, with our information sharing, with our collaboration. Just like a quick example to make that less abstract, I think it'd be useful to come up with a like peer review standard. So instead of these blogs just coming out and people clapping, we shame people if they don't cite things correctly. It doesn't have to be negative like shaming, but we so we follow up, right? If someone's being not concrete, we say, what do you mean by that, right? And so you could just take our discourse to the next level, and instead of thought leadership, people just blasting out what they think. And I know Twitter is a big part of this too. Maybe we can self-discipline and self-organize knowledge sharing in the way that like universities do, right?
Or the Wikipedia model. Citation needed here.
as an exercise, because I leave in a few minutes for my flight, I will just try to explain what happened in these 2 days to the people I meet in the flight and in the airport, and I will just try to, because it might just become the geeks are meeting each other, talking about geek stuff and changing the world, but I will see how it goes today. I will try to talk about DGOV to whoever is next to me in the plane, and I will write on Telegram to you guys how it worked. Might be terrible, but
Yeah. And also, yeah, just in terms of thinking about, different Telegram channels, different like conferences that, may or may not happen that are kind of systematized over time. I don't know how to turn this on. I don't know. Oh, yeah. So I think, I run Alicia Ferratusco. I don't know if you guys know her. I don't know. It's like we run Starfish Network, which is a place that is in San Francisco, and then we also are like partners with Fullnode, where we're like partners with Bushwick Generator in New York, and just kind of have this ecosystem of people who go throughout these different areas. And so I don't know, like if you're going to be in San Francisco or one of those places, you should, tell me like if you want to host your meetup there, if you like want to have people join your Telegram group. Like I think the thing that's really important is creating kind of these ecosystem effects that make it really easy to tap into conversations people are already having. So it's like we don't have to create something new or add, a new structure that people have to keep in mind, but instead figuring out like where people are already talking or where people are already meeting. And that can kind of have, the flavor of this group. I don't know if that's useful at all, but something that I have found,
Yeah, so something I've spoken with a couple of people here about during this event is sort of our heavy intellectual focus. So we've spoken here about blog posts as one outlet where we can talk about these ideas and try and figure them out like that. Again, something that I feel very passionate about is embodied understanding. So we have the concept of like an emergent intelligence that's larger than any of us. So it also means that anything that emerges at that level is going to be unknown to any individual. And also, I think it's important to recognize that we have faculties of understanding and faculties of cognition that are beyond the typical modes that we're taught to reason with. And so I guess I'm going to put myself on the spot here a little bit. But I really want to sort of like encourage us, as we spoke in the meme group earlier, to maybe like just be a little bit less intellectual. And if you want to like spread the idea of DGOV, think about why that is, and then just authentically express yourself in that. And that's kind of I think the most effective way of spreading the movement. And so I'd like to share a poem with you guys that I wrote recently. It was, so the backstory to this poem is I came back from a Vipassana retreat, and after this Vipassana retreat, I read a book. Those of you guys that are familiar with the lineage will know Goenka. So Goenka wrote a 10-page book that was about I can hear it in my voice. So the Buddha, at some point, the Buddha outlined 7 principles for a republic. And it was in the context of, I think it was the Vajrayan Republic were looking for principles that would keep them strong and cohesive. So the Buddha outlined 7 principles, which I don't remember them all, so I'm not going to list them here, but I'm very happy to share the resource. But so I found I was coming back from this retreat, and I was in a state where I could very easily tap into flow. And so I was sort of like freestyle rapping and just writing down like random gibberish. And then eventually as I was writing down random gibberish onto a page, I noticed it sort of like started to flow into a slightly more coherent structure. And it's only after I sort of like was kind of maybe a paragraph and a half into writing gibberish that I realized what I was actually writing about. And it was sort of, I guess, an emergence of understanding of what I'd written about, and also a little bit the tension. I mean, it centers around the tension that I feel in having radically expressed individuality, but being able to fit that into a format that allows cohesion and allows sort of collective action and shared identity. So I'm going to try and read this with as least shaky a voice as I can. So it's called the New Republic. Honored cousins, let us pack up and at the sun up go down together, seeking not warmer weather but cooler climes, with soaring heights to match our wild virtues. We seek unity not through uniformity, but through uniqueness, a palace of self-expression built on nurturing the parts whose sum the whole surpasses. Was not the shoe just right, she never would have reached the throne, our Cinderella. What need have we for chains when the common threads bind us more tightly than hammered steel ever could? The umbilical cord that plays in unison throughout mankind. Where the individual stands sovereign is where we must rebuild the republic. On the seven hills of inner harmony, a true Rome may rise, when at the breasts of wolves we've learnt to be wild once more. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, everyone, for this fishbowl circle, and thanks for the poem.